Welcome to the Quality of Mind Transforming Business podcast, where we explore the game-changing understanding that can unlock new levels of performance and well-being in the workplace. If you want to be part of the new breed of leaders in business, if you're fed up with the conventional echo chamber, and if you want to be part of a revolution in human potential, then join us to discover the powerful resource that lives before our psychology.
Hello and welcome to the Quality of Mind Transforming Business podcast series. And today's guest, Suzie Yeulett, is joining us to talk about what's the point. But there's a lot more to that than we're going to get to in a moment. And Suzie is someone that I've known for a few years now. And actually, I was on her podcast maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and I reposted it on my podcast. So listeners, you can go back and listen to that one as well. But Suzie has done the most amazing thing, I think, when anyone does this. She's written a book all about the point. And that's what I want to talk about today, because the way it points is very similar to what we talk about with quality of mind and before psychology. Suzie, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Good to see you again.
Likewise. So Suzie, for new listeners, can you give just a minute or two of your background and how come you do what you do now? And then we'll get into the point.
Yep. So I'm a change coach certified by Dr. Amy Johnson, and I've started calling myself the 1 point coach because my book, The Point of Now, is always pointing people to the point of now, and we can get into that obviously. And I fell into coaching accidentally, as quite a few people probably do, just after the experience of losing my mum, which we spoke about before, and that being just very different from how I expected it to be, in that I was a busy mum, 2 under 10-year-olds with 2 different schools. I had 2 parents who were unwell with dementia, and I was running 2 businesses at the time, so it really was everything coming in twos. So to use the word overwhelm probably does sum it up if you look at the juggling act I was performing at the time. And when my mum was end of life, that sort of just quietened down a little bit. I didn't do anything about it. I guess because she was dying, it all came down to just being in the moment, because I didn't know how many moments we had left. So whilst before I was thinking, well, I need to go and pick the boys up. What are we doing for tea? I need to sort that out on my partnership business with my friend, or all sorts of things could be going through your mind right now. But actually, at the time, I just needed to be where I was properly, because it was so precious. And that just changed how I saw everything, really, in a very quiet way that at the time I couldn't really describe. Other than people saying, how are you managing to cope so well? And I'm like, I don't know, actually. And then I came across Michael Neill's work and some of the 3 principles stuff. And it just showed me that that's always available to us. If it's available then, when someone who you're extremely close to is dying, then it's always got to be there. And our resilience, I didn't do anything to be so resilient at the time. It just happened because it felt so fundamental and so important, if that makes sense. So it just all made sense to me. And I just then started looking more into this. And I've always been fascinated about how things work. And I've done a bit of design work. So I'm interested in how things are designed and put together. And now that extends to human beings, really. But prior to that, I had an economics degree and worked in the city. So done the whole pathway, really.
And there's more on the details of that in our first episode, which people can listen to. But I think what's so fascinating, isn't it, is that the change happened almost accidentally. And when you recognize something, you then started to look back and go, oh, how did that happen? It wasn't like I had to put lots of tools in or go on self-abidance retreats for months and years and sit on a Zen mountaintop. You know, the system recognized something. And I think I love hearing stories like that, because it means that any of us have what you've seen and point to available.
Yeah.
And it's not like you're a special person or not a special person. It's just there, something for reasons, who knows, was recognized. And then you got curious. And then that curiosity took you into going, and then you started looking at it, and now you want to point others to the very same thing. And what's beautiful is, because you haven't got 20 years of psychological academia backed you up. You can talk about it in a way that's just so simple, and in a way that you've now culminated into your book, which is all about the simplicity of the point, which is what I attempt to do in Quality of Mind. And I think there's a bunch of us who are trying to codify something for people to make it simple, to allow our, let's call it our modern developed minds to get. So can you just give, you might have been asked this question many times, give us just a little succinct synopsis of the point?
Yeah, so I wasn't trying to codify anything. I just started sketching an inverted triangle when I was doing my group calls with my group of ladies. And I just kept creating workbooks, and it just was always there. So it just sort of happened. And really, so if we're looking at an inverted or upside down triangle, I talk about the top line as being sort of the timeline of life, if you like. And that's where the mind sits. So we can be here now, but we can be thinking about what we've got to do later.
And that's what you call the operating system? Is that
yeah,
O?
so I call that, so that's O in the point framework. And I start with O because that's the operating system we have. And that's just the survival mind, and the mind doing what it does, which is going to the past to predict the future. And we are so often thinking and worrying about a future that just never comes.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the biggest thing, as well as you can't do anything about the past. So why do we have so many regrets of it? We can certainly learn from it. It's all imagination and thought. Past isn't happening now. It's a thought or a memory of it. And the future isn't ever going to happen. It's just all projection and imagination, which is based in thought. So there's all that mental activity stretching our attention to the past or future. Whereas actually, if we drop down to the point of now, even just take one short breath, listen to whatever noise is here. And that is life. That is life right here, right now. Because, I mean, life is just this one breath, this one nanosecond that's constantly moving. But if we just settle into the presence, and we're not looking for presence because presence is already here and we are always present. Our body is always present. Where else could it be? There might be people who think it could be somewhere else, but as far as I'm concerned, our body is always here now. It's just, where is our attention? And our attention is what the mind's doing, where the mind's going. So I talk about it more as a direction of travel, just pointing to now, away from the busy mind, and feeling that stretch. I call it mind the gap. If we're feeling that tension and pressure, we can just check in with ourselves. Is that something I really can do anything about now, or need to do anything about now? Or can I just settle back to this very moment? And clients just remember the inverted triangle without all the layers. I just put those in to help us to go through the journey of looking more deeply at what's here, or slowing down to now, to just reveal how the mind works, so people can see the nature of thought and look at their own experience, really. And clients just remember the point on an aeroplane, or they're going through, have a car crash, it seems to just pop into their mind, and they can just bring themselves back to now. Not bring themselves back, but bring their attention back. And it just lightens the load. But the other thing I love about it is, if we know that the future doesn't exist and life is always now, truly the next moment is totally unlimited and full of possibility. So it lightens the load, but it also makes us feel more open to the chance of something new coming along, which I absolutely love, because we can just open to that and just not worry so much.
I mean, I think a lot of people listening to that will be able to relate to what you've been saying. So at one level, we've got this sort of day-to-day, just what we do, right? In our conditioned self, busy minds, thinking about the past, the future, trying to control everything, being in just the day-to-day. And that's where a lot of us spend our time, in that operating systems, you call it. Yeah. And then in little moments, we might find that we feel more, you could put language, more grounded, more present. And even tools in traditional psychology will say, well, ground yourself, notice the tree, notice your foot on the floor. So we know there's this thing we would call now, that even just a couple of breaths, or just the noticing of it, takes us out of that kind of real but never true appearing hum bum of life, and feels resetting to an extent. And I guess a lot of us kind of know that, and then we feel that sort of, I think it's what you referred to as mind the gap, that kind of almost semi-tension between, well, I've got this going on, but I also know there's this bit of the system or me. And sometimes it feels like I can't get from one to the other. And I know you talk about that in your book, but what would you say about that? So if you're in this operating life, blah, 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 you kind of know there's this presence, this now, this available, but you don't feel like you can get there.
Yeah. Well, I shared about this on a LinkedIn post the other day, but one of my sons was having a sort of anxiety spiral one night, and he was sort of pacing about and talking a lot. And I just said to him, please, can you just stand still a moment? Just stop and look at me and just slow down. I mean, I didn't even tell him to do anything particular. I just said, just stop, take a breath. I said, can you just tell me where this problem is right now in this room? Where is it? And he found it quite hard to find it.
Yeah.
Because it was all his overthinking, ruminating mind, which we all have to a certain extent. And so he just sort of stopped, and it just helped him in the moment. And I said, that is always available to you at school or whatever you're doing. You can just help yourself. That is all this is, really. And I talk about it as being the mental complexity down to just the present moment. Literally, we can do one thing. Well, we can only do one thing at a time. We can only have one thought, one breath at a time. So let's just meet that where it is, meet reality. Just this moment, just this everything that's here. And importantly, it's not to deny anything. It's actually to sort of allow everything. So yeah, you're feeling awful at the moment. You're feeling a bit stressed. Well, let's just slightly lean into that gently, because that feeling and that thought can't hurt us. And so I think there's something about showing the nervous system the safety in the moment that is going to help us. And I know there's lots of studies of that, but I do feel that ultimately they are pointing to that. And what I think we do is not add more complexity around diving into that and working it out and adding more thought to it, adding a kind of reframe or trying to trick ourselves so that it doesn't mean anything. But if we can literally just be with it.
It reminds me of a story. This might be a slight segue. Is that years ago, before I got into understanding quality of mind, I was big into sort of hypnotherapy and NLP and all those kind of things. And I used to work as a volunteer therapist for the National Phobic Society. It was fascinating because you'd meet people with really kind of interesting, weird and wonderful phobias. And one of the things there was the fear of the fear. Yeah. So I used to call it the fear of the fear. I don't think it was my phrase, but is that the mind's always thinking, well, something might happen, something might happen, something might happen, something might happen. When they get a phobic response to a caterpillar or a balloon or a clown or whatever it is. And actually, if you go into this very, very moment, we might define what that is a bit later on, there's no fear. But the mind will very quickly go, but what at the next second? There might be fear in the next second or whatever. But okay, I'm okay now. But so fast, the mind chimes in with this, but what about? So it's the fear of the fear, not the fear per se. Because if you want to call it rational fear, it sorts itself out, right? You don't even have thought about that. The body system just reacts. So we're constantly in this little micro fear of the fear. And when we come into this very moment, that dissolves just for a microsecond. And I guess what you're pointing to here is that microsecond might feel only like a microsecond, but it's every single microsecond. So it's always there.
Yeah, it's always available. Yeah.
But we just think it's going to go because we get this fear of the fear. So my next question would be that what do you think the role of, and this is something I've looked at for 10, 15 years, the role of what I call realizations about the nature of the system plays to this. So rather than this just being, okay, here's a tool or technique, you take a breath when you're anxious, right? And ground yourself, which could be what people are hearing in what you're saying. Mm-hmm. But I know from having talked to you before and obviously read more of your book and things, is you're also pointing to the system having realized something about the very nature of the mind, thought, consciousness, and our psychology. Can you say a little bit about that?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's so simple. It's just understanding what's going on with the mind and understanding that. But that also, I mean, a lot of coaching now is talking about shifting your identity so that you can be the person you want to be down the line.
Oh, don't get me started on that. Yeah.
Well, what is identity? I did a podcast episode on this just recently. What is identity?
I know.
And
I
if
saw
we
it.
really look at it, it is just a thought. It's what we're thinking about ourselves. And someone commented on a post of mine about that, and they said, well, there's what we think about ourselves and there's what other people think about us as our identity. I'm like, you have no control over what other people are thinking of you ever. And they will always be changing. They're not thinking about you that much anyway in the first place. They're thinking about themselves. So if we really start to look at what is identity and recognize that it's moving, fluid thoughts in the moment that are either occurring to us or someone else or they're not, I think that's really helpful.
Yeah.
And I know you talking about this self, which is always a tricky one. And I did find that tricky for a while because I just thought it stayed in a bit of a philosophical, there's no self, or how does that help? And I'm always looking with my work to be as practical as possible. And so, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I agree with you. And that's when direct inquiry, what I call direct experience inquiry, made such a difference for me because I instinctively, intuitively did start to see that this self is just psychological. But I was like, well, that's an idea. And I kind of feel it when I dissolve into the whatever I'm doing. But direct inquiry experience, which regular listeners to the Quality of Mind podcast will know I bang on about a lot, is all about seeing that, recognizing that for yourself, non-self, in the moment. It's just taking all the noise away and just really looking to see. I use the frame of, well, imagine you're a tiny infant or a Martian in this moment, and you imagine you know nothing about science or cognition or anything like that. You've literally just been popped into this body-mind system. Where do you find that self? How does it appear? And it appears through thought, sensation, and perception. That's the only way we have a self. It is a psychological construct. And if we're not having a thought, sensation, or perception about this thing called a self, it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist. You could take a frame saying, imagine you were born blind and you were brought up in such a way that no one ever told you. This is a bit of an artificial one, but imagine no one ever told you about the idea of a body or a you. You would not have the idea of a separate self.
Yeah. Although I think the baby is the classic example because I remember my youngest son, just when he wasn't with me, he wasn't happy. And when I was there, he would smile. And that's because he thought we were still one, almost in a way, because they don't see the separation at that point. And what comes in then is all the conditioning of you having a name and you having to be a good boy or girl, or you having to wear this uniform for school and you having to fit in these boxes. So we become identified with that.
Absolutely. And it creeps in so early on, but the self is not innate. You're not born with a separate self. I mean, there's never a separate self anyway, but we learn it and as we get told it. And that's why when little babies first start talking, they refer to themselves in the third person.
Yeah.
They don't even use I. They can't recognize themselves in a mirror. They can't, in a photo, they're like, what's that kind of thing? And tiny infants don't even mind when you leave the room, tiny ones, because they haven't had the idea that you can disappear, which is why what I used to call the muslin on the head game where you pretend peekaboo. Is it peekaboo? That's why that works at a certain age. It doesn't work when they're tiny because there's not even the appearance of separation. So what we're pointing to here is that this identity, let's get back to that. And I talk about the case of mistaken identity is the biggest thing to see through at a realized level through direct inquiry, not just through intellect, through direct inquiry. So once we see through this case of mistaken identity, which is exactly what you were saying on your LinkedIn post, I remember, I think I might have even commented on it, is that it's the identity, the self-identification through the mistaken, invisible, and innocent misunderstanding conviction that we are a separate self that keeps us up in that operating level, at the top of your triangle, which stops us pointing down. Because which type of humans are in the point of now more than anyone else? Babies.
Yeah.
That's all they are.
Yeah.
They don't have an operating system yet. They can't go up there because they haven't really got it. And then they very quickly get one, and then it becomes prevalent. But if we can realize what we truly are before the idea of this psychological identity, and recognize and realize that the only way we have an identity is through the coming and going of psychological activity, that to me so shifts the ratio of whether we're up in the operating system or we're in bottom of your triangle.
Yeah. And the way I sometimes put it is, if we notice how personally we're taking things, so we're in that detail of me and my little life, that's going to contract us and make us very limited in what we're seeing. So I think it's that taking it personally, recognizing that is such a significant thing, really, because that is showing us that tension, whilst our attention is being sort of distracted everywhere, we're very much worrying about us and how we fit into the world or don't fit into the world, and what do we do about this problem. So we're going into thinking and action mode. Whereas actually, if we can notice that tension and just give ourselves a moment to sort of step away or do nothing, we can let go of that a little bit, because one of the layers in the triangle, the top one, is perspective. And that's kind of above and around and beyond anything else. And so I'll talk to clients about zooming out, which sounds difficult in a way. But if we're zooming away from that very personal story about ourselves and our lives.
Because I think what you're pointing to is what I call neutral noticing, which is what I describe with my clients. It's just, that looks like it's happening to a separate me, but it kind of isn't. Now, in what I call the expanded aperture, that's quite easy to spot. And actually that will also dissolve it. And the tension will feel, the nervous system will reset, the vagus nerve will sort itself out. Done. Now, often a client will go, well, I kind of know it's not me, the mind, but I can't get out of it. So they kind of it's noticed, but it's not a realized noticing, right? So they kind of go, well, I know there's this perspective, but it still feels really like palpable, it's visceral, it's pumping along, and I can get out of it for a second, but then it comes back. So the dancing, it hasn't quite been realized yet. Now, what do you point people to? I keep using your point word now, and I keep noticing I use the word point. Isn't it funny? What do you point people then when they say, well, I kind of get what you're on about, but it doesn't feel that easy?
Yeah. Well, a few things. With clients, if you're seeing them for a number of sessions, it's quite handy because you can take note of what they're worrying about that's coming up in the future. And then afterwards, you can speak to them about it. So I think this is where it's useful to reflect on the past, because I can say to them, well, do you remember all that stress and anxiety about this trip overseas or something, or this presentation you were having? And then we can say, how did that actually go? And so they can recognize that all the things that they were worrying about potentially happening didn't happen. But furthermore, anything that did happen, they could manage it, they could cope. Mm-hmm. So seeing afterwards how it actually panned out is quite useful.
Yeah, and I think also I would add to that there's a piece of realization we can have that, and it comes back to this case of mistaken identity, that there is part of us that whatever happens, even the worst thing you didn't want to have happen happens, or whatever it is, that there's part of us that is undamaged by that.
Yeah.
So whatever happens in the content of our experience, so anything we perceive or feel, because most of us, we don't like feelings. I don't want to feel like that. I felt like that last time. It was horrible. It felt stressful, pressured. I felt uncomfortable. I felt alone. I felt angry. So we don't like feelings. But anything that we feel, perceive, think cannot damage the part of us before that, which is what I would call the bit before the self, right? Yeah. Because that is ring fence. That is It's like the sky to the weather. It's the screen to the movie. It's the frying pan to the food. So yes, we might feel some things we would call horrible and perceive some things that we feel horrible, but so what? That's just the richness of being alive.
Yeah.
It brings variation into the human experience, but crucially, you're designed to feel that.
Yes. And I think we've just stopped feeling so much. We're so distracted. And so, I mean, having phones and things is a perfect illustration of that. If we feel a little bit of discomfort, we reach for the phone and just distract ourselves away from it.
Yes.
So if we can just, if we don't feel that and we're always rushing ahead and overriding our felt sense almost, then that's going to just add to the pressure I feel. And I do think the nervous system wants to complete that cycle almost of feeling the feeling. And if we're always dashing away from it, that's going to become a habitual kind of pattern almost, or be felt somewhere or not felt somewhere. And I think we're just meant to feel. But the other thing about what you just said is when my mum was dying, I had this weird feeling of, well, obviously it's natural and what can I do about it? But also I just really felt, even though I really didn't want her to die, I really felt I'm okay. And bizarrely, she's okay.
Yeah.
And I don't know where that came from. That was just something that I truly felt at the time. And so it was less scary, even though I didn't want it to happen as well.
Yeah. I'm so with you. My brother died of a brain tumor when he was 34, and I had the same thing. I loved him to bits and we were very close, but it was okay. And people at the time said, well, why aren't you crying more? Why aren't you more upset? I don't know. It just felt powerful to me. And in the moment, in the moment he actually passed, I was with him, the breathing went, and something just, and this is pre my understanding of this is 2004, something just felt rich and alive in the universe, even though he's passing. And I can't explain it. And well, I just tried to, but it's beyond words. So I'm with you on that. And then
that's important. What you just said, you felt that before having any.
This was not me.
That is because it's natural and it's innate in all of us.
What you said at the beginning.
Yeah,
and it's available to all of us. Now we don't have to have a mother dying or a brother dying, or
no.
It just so happens that the reason that, because I've wondered this question for a while, is how come it looks like it happens more often when there's something like that, or a traumatic event or whatever. And that's purely, in my mind, I might be wrong on this, but is in that moment, there is a rupture to the conceptual mind, the self-mind's ability to generalize and predict and control the world. Because it's a new experience. It can't do it.
And you can't do anything about someone dying.
No, but sometimes we try to, which is why we control it. But in that moment, if the system ruptures, in that gap, right, where the conceptual mind's got nowhere to go, it goes to this deeper point piece. Yeah. And then some realization pops in there. And sometimes people found it a little bit in COVID, actually. They found that rupture, that break to their routine, that severe break to their routine, give a little bit of space. And in that space, realizations pop in about the nature of the system. So I think what that points us to is that the system wants us to see this, or almost it wants us to. But as you said earlier, we keep running away from it. And feelings, as we were talking about a couple of minutes ago, is such a good example of that, because let's go back to babies and infants. They feel stuff. They don't try and conceptualize their fears or hide them behind an iPad or eat them. Not till we tell them that's what they need to do. But little infants will feel anything.
Yeah.
And they go towards feeling. They don't care whether they're crying or laughing or grumpy or what we might think is good. They just feel. And guess what? Their feelings are so dynamic and transient.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we've forgotten how to feel.
Yeah. Because having a tantrum, walking out of John Lewis because you haven't been able to buy a toy, for example, a very specific example, when you're 2, you're not worrying about what anyone thinks of you or what your mum feels, the stress she feels, dragging you out. You are just reacting to how you're feeling in the moment. And I think that's such a good example.
It's just a resistance to the isness in the moment, which you don't self-identify with.
Yeah.
And even when you get home and you want to tell your toddler, you shouldn't do that. When we're in the shop, you should not. And they're looking at you as if to go, what? as if like, A, that's years away
Yeah.
for them. It's
Yeah.
like well, that was 10 minutes ago. What are you on about? And two, they're like, well, why wouldn't I just feel it? Well, why is it they can't articulate this, but you get a sense of that it doesn't make any sense to them that they wouldn't feel. Because
Yeah.
all they're doing is feeling, and then they're
Yeah.
not. And they're feeling different.
Which shows how conditioned and habitual the whole thing is. And so that's why I think it can be easy to see through in a way once you just start really looking at that.
It can be so easy, but I use the phrase it goes from invisible to subtle to obvious, and it's not
Yeah.
actually that linear. But it can look like you're listening to Piers and Suzie talking about, you going, what are they on about? And then you're just like, oh yeah, I kind of get what they mean. It will look subtle, and then the more you look, the more the system realizes it becomes more obvious. You start seeing it everywhere. You're like, oh gosh, my mind is popping out of the point, the now up to operating system. Oh, I'm seeing it more, and just to seeing it more.
Yes.
And then we can start to see this isn't me trying to game the system now by pretending to tell it. Well, I'm going to tell myself to get present. The default is the bottom of your triangle, which is just
the point of now.
Yeah, just is. Right, just is. And because that's where babies are.
Yeah.
Babies at the bottom. And then our conditioning takes us out.
Yeah.
And we have to look at it that way. It's not us trying to do a technique to get from the operating system at the top of the triangle into the now, even though it looks like a technique might work, because I could do some nice vagus breathing or go for a run or have a cup of tea. It's not that. That's correlation, not cause.
Yeah, we're not trying to reframe anything. We are literally understanding how we operate and seeing the simplicity of the present moment.
Yes.
And seeing through the illusion of time, really, and the mind.
And self.
Seeing the mind, and the self, but seeing the mind for what it is, the old survival mechanism, that's always going to go on. And even when I was with my mum, and my mind certainly couldn't work out how this was going to go, and that did give me a sense of spaciousness, I guess, there's always still noise there, I think, but it's just not attaching onto it and worrying about it so much. I think your mind can be worrying about what's going to happen in the future or later or what happened yesterday, but it's just that not taking it so seriously is really it. It's not trying to, and we're always trying to say, let's just be calm, or it's not that at all, because the mind will just do what it does. So we're not trying to do anything other than recognizing what's really going on and settling into how the system works. And we're not even trying to be present all the time, but it's more a noticing of when we're not, through that feeling of tension and pressure, and just being able to slow down, stop, notice, drop, and then you're open to more perspective and more availability in the next moment.
Because what you just said points to something else that we think we can do, which is to try and be present, to try and notice, which again, case of mistaken identity, it's because we believe we might have agency on being able to move our attention. Now, again, if you go into direct experience inquiry and try to control your thoughts, you can't.
No.
You can't even control which ones come in. They just appear. If that's how we actually look at the direct experience inquiry. So this idea that the self-mind now has got a job to do in, I'm going to read Piers' stuff or Suzie's stuff, and I'm going to then try and do this, that doesn't really work. It's there already. So if you put more trying in, you're then powering up the separate identity again to try and make it happen. And that is a problem, which segues nicely into something else I want to talk about, which is when we are presenting these books or these frameworks or things, I think, well, I don't know what you find, but it looks like we're presenting here's something to try. Mm-hmm. We're actually saying here's something to notice before the idea of a trying self. Yeah. But that's a hard thing to get across in words or a LinkedIn post or something. So, because there's books and books on the bookshelf in the self-help section, which is giving it a different direction.
Yeah.
So what have you found in that, in the way that people who, let's say someone who doesn't know anything about your book has just picked it and they're not acquainted to this difference between trying and just noticing and realizing, what have you found in that?
Well, because you've kindly read the book, I mean, I talk about my story of loss and how that all sort of panned out, but I also use client examples and bits from podcast episodes I've done with lots of different people now. So there's always kind of practical, real lived examples or stories to try and help just point in this direction. And I think that helps because it's not keeping it in the conceptual realm of you've got to understand this intellectually and then you've got to do something. I am literally just saying, look at this and see what occurs to you, see what you notice and see what you recognize in it. And that's all it is really. So I'm not really trying to sell it to people as something they really need. It's more a just see. Just
and I
see
know
what
you say
happens.
that in your book again and again and again, but that people need to read the book to know that.
Yeah.
This is so funny, right?
Yeah.
Because I find that people because I say that, but they almost want to do the trying before they've read the book or listen to the thing. I'm like, yeah, but if you actually had listened to what I'm saying don't do what you're trying. But they hear it and go, oh, there's a new framework for me. I'll put that little triangle on my desk and oh yeah, okay, without really getting into the nuance, simplicity of it, because you put all these kind of caveats. Don't try, exactly like I do. Don't try and do this, see it, blah, blah, blah. But that's hard for people. Do you find that people are looking, this might just be me, people are looking for a gist. So they want to know, tell me the gist of your triangle.
Yeah, maybe. But the gist is so simple. It is, let's move away or let's just notice the mind in action, taking us away from now and distracting us. And let's just notice that. And we can allow ourselves to just be here, which we already are, but let our mind be here with us to meet the moment and see the moment. And you can do that in a second. And then you can forget about it. But the more you're noticing it, the more you can just help yourself. And I think there's something about seeing through how busy the mind is and how much of a storyteller it is. As soon as you start to see that, I think you just see it more. And so that's the beauty of sort of having some coaching sessions rather than just one conversation. Or that is the beauty of it, because you're just always pointing in the same direction, showing the layers that are there, which they're not really layers, it's just the way I've described it, but just seeing how it works and then noticing it more.
Yeah. And I think that's something I've looked at in my work is how far can you get with just the noticing piece?
Yeah.
And sometimes it's all you need.
Yeah.
And I've seen that time and time again, and you've got beautiful examples of it. And it is that. And because the system self-realizes, if you want to call it that, auto-realizes, I'm trying to not use the word self, it auto-realizes. It's like I use the metaphor sometimes of these smart thermostats you can get nowadays. You don't have to you don't have to keep looking at the temperature and clicking the dial. It kicks in. It kind of, just like in the morning, if you're still in your dream when you wake up, the system kicks in and the dream dissolves, even though it might be a very palpable, visceral, powerful dream, your heart rate was going, it just kicks in and the dream just pops. You're like, oh. So that auto-realizing can happen.
Yes.
Now, it also looks to me like, and the more I get into this over the last 5-10 years, is there's a piece of conditioning, conviction of this idea of separate identity and the mistake of case and separate identity, that it's helpful to have unseen, dissolves, and then that noticing that you're talking about kicks in a lot easier. So it's like the noticing it's brilliant, and sometimes it's all it needs for people. It's just, and other times or other people or other situations, other conditionings, there needs to be a loosening of the conviction in the case of mistaken identity.
Yeah.
For the change to become pervasive, sustainable, and transformative.
Yeah, and maybe some people won't fully get there with it, and that's okay too, because people are just where they are. We were talking about having teenagers earlier, and they're just where they are because they've only had the experience they've had to this moment in time, and that's the same for everyone. So it's just going to be what it's going to be for people. And so, as for a while, when I first saw this, I just thought, oh my goodness, everyone has to know this. And I do feel it would help anyone.
Yeah.
But I support a couple of guys in prison via email for a charity, and they have got probably more extreme conditioning to a certain way of being. And I do notice that it takes them a little bit longer, some of them get it immediately. And so that just fascinates me as well, because everyone just is where they are. It can help some people, but it might not help other people, and that's okay too.
And I think what you're pointing to there is something I've looked at in the past, is always, actually, not just the past, is your own self-identification with your wanting everyone to get this, because it's a lovely thing for the world to see more of. So, and then I want to see more, I want to see more, I want to have the big, profound realizations, because I know they're available, because I have millions of clients who've had it. So, but actually also just being neutral and going, well, okay, they'll see what they'll see.
Yeah.
And not being in the of your model yourself as a practitioner or a author or a pointer.
Yeah.
And the neutrality of that really helps, not just your own well-being as a coach or practitioner in this, but also your clients, because they just like, well, you're pointing something out, they'll see it or they won't. And if they do, they do. If they don't, they don't. But to me, it is the most powerful direction to point to. And the simplicity, which is why I love what you're talking about, is so simple, right? Because it's so ordinary. It's extraordinarily ordinary. It's extraordinary. But it's so, it can come across very complicated and convoluted. And what you're doing with your point is just, no, it's this simple. No, it's this simple. Now, you're going to write a book about it and put another 100 pages on that simplicity, but only to illustrate it, to give it a bit of real world examples and things like that. But it's so simple and ordinary and available that it's hiding, it's missing.
Yeah. And sometimes with clients, it's not even a big realization. It can be quite a subtle little thing that you say that you wouldn't have thought would be that powerful, and they just see it because they're ready for it and they're open to it, and they just see it in the moment. And that one little thing, like telling someone or saying to someone, you haven't actually got a problem that you need to fix here. You are okay. And you don't need to keep doing all this reading and working even though I'm selling a book. Even that can help people to just have a feeling of relief.
Yeah. So it's because, despite the fact we're writing books and talking in a podcast, it's not about the words.
Yeah.
Which is, people like, it's the system recognizing something which may look like it's triggered by some words that you say or I say, but it's what happens underneath those words that's so magical. And this little sentence that a client says back to you, you can't even usually remember telling them, did I say that? Oh, maybe I did. But that's what's available here. That shift can sometimes be so unintentional and happens, and sometimes it feels like it's just little nudges and pointers, and the distillation happens. The odd person will have a really big, profound woohoo shift, but that's not most people in my mind. It generally comes in gradually if they're just open to it.
Exactly. And I think that's what I love about the work I'm doing. When I'm with someone, I don't have anything planned or prepared, or I'm not trying to point them anywhere, really. I mean, obviously there's a general direction we point in, but I think if you're truly open with someone and you're just present, then they can feel that as well. And so, of course, we can't predict how it's going to go, because none of us can ever, and the next moment is completely open. And just the power of this is very strong, but in a peaceful and calm way. And I think the more people that do have some awareness of this, or start to feel this a little bit in their own experience more often, they then have a different come from, or a different way of being, subtly, but it's more natural because we're more our true self.
Yeah, it's innate, an organic way of shifting, rather than adding tools and protocols and psychological strategies, which ultimately might be tactically helpful but lead to more burnout and more striving. So we're shifting that, disrupting the trend of add more in to try and get better and to see what's there already, So
And I think something really that I know you talk about as well is if we can just see we don't need to improve ourselves because we're already 100% exactly right as we are. And so if everybody in the world, if that rippled out to everyone, there wouldn't be any wars or racism, or because we'd all see that we are all fundamentally the same thing and we're all part of the same whole. We are whole because we're all part of this big one experience that's happening right now.
yeah, wow, isn't that needed in the world right now, given all the me, not the we, and not seeing with the same system. And I think, having been in this area for a few years now, I love the fact that the scientific community is shifting. I mean, you probably know Don Hoffman. I've been a big fan of his work for a long time, and he's now got on popular podcasts. He's on Piers Morgan. He's on, who's that big American podcaster that everyone listens to? Can't remember his name right now. But this guy who is, you could call it a niche guy with a niche scientific take on the world, that consciousness is primary, is now getting onto popular podcasts. Now, they're not really able to hear him quite yet.
Yeah.
I think he's also on Stephen Bartlett's, which is fantastic. But it's pointing. So things are looking like, from a scientific perspective, that the scientific world is losing its grip on materialism being the only way. And that's going to help too.
Yes.
So I think the signs are going in the right direction compared to what I see 10, 15 years ago. But it does require a little bit of just, not a lot, but just a bit of pressing pause on what we currently think we see, and just taking a moment to look in the direction that you're pointing to or I'm pointing to, and start to see little tentacles of it, and then go, oh. And I think your book does that beautifully. It just gives people a chance to have a little pause, break, and just,
Yeah.
So, Suzie, we're coming towards the end of time. It flies by always when we chat. Is there anything you'd like to leave listeners with that we haven't covered already, or reiterate, or say in a different way? How would you put a bow on this?
I think just to know that the present moment is always here. Presence is already here. We are already here. Our bodies are already here. So the only thing to notice is, where is our attention or our mind going? And the way we do that is by noticing how we feel in the moment.
And I'll add one thing to that, because I think that's very nicely said, is that body we think is already here isn't here. It's apparent. So whereas there's sensations appearing in the system, it's not like my body is feeling this, because that then makes it self-identified and separate again. And it's like, well, I need to solve my body's feeling. What we call a feeling is just happening in the system. And then later on, the mind will call it, well, that's happening in my body. So if we can just see sensation or feeling as just what's occurring, not even to a body, really. I mean, you can call it a body if you want, but sometimes when we call it a body, it makes us think it's then something to be dealt with or managed or not felt, because my body can't handle this feeling. So the idea that the body doesn't feel, it's just sensation that the mind then labels as the body. But the sensation is so telling you, as you just said, telling you where you're at in what I would call aperture, and where you would say in your triangle. And if we can see that more, just notice that recognition pop.
Yeah.
So,
and it's just, rather than body, what is here in your experience right now? What are you experiencing right now? What do you notice right now?
Yes. What's being noticed? I mean, this is where language goes wrong. What's being noticed? I mean, language is so set up for duality that we can't even put a sentence together without it looking like it's happening to you. But we won't get into that. I mean, I've got plenty of podcasts where I do get into that. So what I would say, just to wrap this up, listeners, is for people who are familiar with quality of mind, have a look at Suzie's book, because it points in a similar but different way. So you might see some, that dovetails beautifully, or there's something new there. If you're not familiar with quality of mind and you're baffled by it, then have a look at Suzie's book, because it's another way of seeing it so simply in the moment, and it's nicely illustrated with some relevant examples from yourself and from your clients and from other bits of podcasts you've done. So it's nicely backed up, and it's just another door into what we're pointing to here. And I think anyone that articulates that beautifully like you have, I'd recommend and say, have a listen, have a look, see what you think, and just start noticing. So, and that's all we're saying. Just start
Yeah.
noticing. And people are like, it can't be that simple. You're telling me I just got to start noticing? Yes.
Yeah. Because we're just noticing what's kind of been invisible until now, really.
Yeah.
And we both use the word curiosity, and that's what my podcast is always pointing to. Just, I say in the book, notice, drop to the point, and just be open to what's next, because you don't know. How can the mind ever know what is going to happen next?
Yeah. And isn't that beautiful to know that you don't have, it's not your job anymore to try and work out what's going to happen in the next second. And it's so obvious when you think about that, because you're like, of course I don't even know what word's coming after this word. I don't know what's happening. Anything. I don't know. I don't need to know. The system's got our back.
And we can still plan and put things in the diary so we can meet at the same time to record a podcast or whatever we're doing. But we're just not taking that all so seriously, because if an emergency occurred, we would deal with that and we would just reschedule. So we don't have to take it all so seriously, I guess,
that's one of the
helpful.
One of the things happens, isn't it? The implication of this, you just find life becomes less, there's still important things, but it becomes less serious.
Yeah.
You know?
And you still will potentially worry, but you catch on to that a lot more quickly. And so you don't waste so much energy and you don't get so distracted for so long, I would say, in my experience.
You laugh at yourself so much more going, what is my mind on about? You just catch that and it becomes lighter and it's easier just to see through it. And it's beautiful. Suzie, thanks for your time today. It's been lovely to chat with you. Highly recommend the book. I'll put it in the show notes, but I know it's on Amazon and stuff. But what's your website?
Well, the book and the website, you can go to thepointofnow.com and that goes to my website and has all my details. So, easiest way to remember it.
So thank you so much for coming on. And listeners, highly recommend it. And as usual, listeners, have fun being curious and catch you next time. Thanks.
If you enjoyed listening to this podcast and want to know more, check out our website at qualityofmind.biz. And also feel free to reach out and leave us a review or a comment. Until next time, have fun being curious.